Well, welcome everyone back to the Yosan University 39 Gen podcast. And I've got an awesome guest with me that I've been trying to get on for a while, but we finally connected. So I'm super excited about this. Can you tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
I'm Josh Paynter. This is a fun podcast for me because I'm faculty at Yosan, at least, whatever, tangentially, periodically. I'm a practitioner of Chinese medicine. I have been for a long time, and I'm a practitioner of Daoism and a teacher of that as well. And that's really those are my two most central interests. I also, do calligraphy and carve jade and other hobbies like that are also related. Luckily, all of my things seem to stick together into a nice, comfy aggregate. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, the leads to so many questions right there. Like that's awesome. I mean,
go ahead.
I could do a whole podcast with you on jade carving, but let's dive into I actually had some jade that I found in California and I had carved here in Asia. And
At Big Sur?
it's just one. I did. It was actually Goat Rock in Northern California. It was
Very
north
cool.
of that. And it was just this beautiful piece of jade. And then I brought it to Asia. And they're like, this isn't the greatest quality jade, but they carved it into a shape that I still asked. And I was just like, that's awesome. I'm so happy.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Right? So awesome. But like one of the things too there, I am going to go into that. There is something there. The idea of one of the beautiful things about jade or carving in general is that the potential to see what lies beneath that talk to me about that.
Yeah. There's even a character for that. So the jade has a grain. That character for the jade for the grain in jade is this really interesting character, Li. And Li is also a character heavily used in Neo-Confucianism and like post-Song Dynasty Taoism to represent like the grain of a human being, like our inner nature, the patterns that make us, that make us individual. So it's definitely jade as a metaphor. I mean, all the way back to Confucius, he compares the gentleman to the tinkling purity of jade and the sound, the pure ringing tinkling of jade. So it's definitely, that stone offers lots of cultural metaphors for the qualities of a person, but most primarily that character Li, that essential grain, that inner fabric and fiber of the stone and also of a person is used heavily in philosophical circles to describe like what's beneath, what's inside. We have that crust. So like there's a type of jade that's like really sought after. I have a few of these. It's called ziliao, which is like they're pebbles, and they're pebbles that are, so jade is formed tectonically where two plates collide. There's a lot of heat, stuff melts in the middle. A lot of those elements that find each other form lots of different things. Jade is one of those things, and it's pushed up in the Earth's crust up into mountains. Chunks crack off. They work their way down into riverbeds, and then they roll for centuries or millennia or more. And as it rolls, this is interesting because it goes into the cultivation of any practice, really. As it rolls, all of the defects are broken off. They're worn away until just the essential purity is left. And those little ziliao are basically like the perfect pieces of jade because all of the other stuff has been worn off over time. And just like us, I think, the more we practice and study and cultivate and experience and are aware of higher purposes, whatever that may be, we get rid of our rough spots and the crumbly parts and all of that, and we end up hopefully with some essential version of the self.
I love that. There was so before we started the conversation, we looked at my daughter's artwork, and my daughter is someone that I invest highly into. One of my favorite books is The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, and he begins this book thanking all of these people who helped him in his life, and some of them are like, and he's got this thing, and he's like, to my father who realized that good tutors are very important. And so I was like, I tried to find tutors for my daughter. She's 9 now, but for the last 3 or 4 years, we had a couple options for her school. We first of all sent her to an international school, which was extremely expensive, and it wasn't that great. And we were like, well, let's just send her to a local school that's a good school, and then use any of that extra money to invest into different tutors that can come in. And we had a couple. One was an art teacher who came in and guided her, and she's, her art is getting better. But the one that was really challenging for a long time was piano. And she comes from a very musical family. My wife is a musician, her father's a musician, her mother's a musician. It's like they're all amazing musicians in a way that I can't even comprehend. They just can remember music and things that it's fascinating to see them interact with music. And my daughter, I was like, oh man, it looks like she got it from my side. And, she was just like struggling with the piano. And it was a real struggle. It was 3 years of just like, you are my sunshine, and twinkle, twinkle, little star. And I was getting to the point where I was like, do we just stop this? Do we just keep going? I don't know. And my wife was like, one day came down to my office slash the music room, and started just showing my daughter something. And she showed her something at just this song that she liked. And it was like, I don't know what it was, but this additional seed had been planted in this pebble that had been rolled for a while. And suddenly, a couple days later, I come down and my daughter is playing Bach. And I was just like, hang on, where did that come from? And then she's like playing this piece from Bach, and then she was playing like this sonata, and I was just like, what happened here? And then now she's playing all of these beautiful classical pieces. And I looked at her piano teacher and I said, what was that? And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, she just needed time.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh my goodness. And to bring this back to Taoism, the study of Chinese medicine, I think long students go through, this is the Yosan University podcast, and students are sitting there going through this process going, wow, there is a lot of information, but I don't think people realize that you are the stone that is right now in that river just tumbling,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that there's going to be this point where this synthesis comes in and you're just like, wow, I get it. Oh, tongue diagnosis. Oh, a pulse. Oh, this. And it's just suddenly you see this big picture. For me, it was when I was learning Vietnamese. I was in Vietnam. I heard tones. Now, for people that come from the West, when you start learning a tonal language, welcome to a world of fun, because it's like, you know ma 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 ma, and Vietnamese has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tones, and so it's a lot to process, and you're
Yeah.
just sitting there, and then one day I heard it. And there was a great line in the old Tron movie, not the old one but the newer one, and he's like, and then I got in. And like,
Mhm.
and it was just there's a certain point in time where you're immersed in this world. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. Um, so when I got into Chinese medicine school, I had already studied Chinese medicine in China as an undergraduate. So I was studying with no attempt at licensure or anything like that. It was just being offered to me at Yunnan University where I was enrolled in 1994. And so when I got to Chinese medicine school in New York, I, I this was definitely wrong, incorrect, but I thought I knew more than I did. You know what I mean? I thought I knew something and I definitely didn't. But however, I was really like, I did have access to the Chinese language and that definitely was something. But I spent those next, it's 5 academic years because it's trimesters. We never had a break, right? We never get the break in Chinese medicine school. It's all
No.
jammed in as so we spend the equivalent of 5 years memorizing stuff. And I remember feeling like I had to assess how I could provide what the program required of me to be deemed successful there. And clearly,
Mm,
at the time, I don't know if this is the same at all schools, it definitely was at mine. It was essentially like, if you memorize this stuff and you can give it back to us, then that's how we assess success. So I memorized everything. I memorized
mm,
Bensky, the old green version. Luckily, it wasn't the newer ones, but I knew every word on every page and what page number it was on, and I could visually disperse it in my mind and search it like it was inside my head. Um, and that was my version of success at the time, of
mm,
fluency and the capacity to what I thought to do Chinese medicine. The interesting thing is that all of that memorization is in theory, and it's all establishing a relationship between the human being and the information unfortunately, in a very syllogistic way, which is all Chinese medicine at that time for me was reduced to, if this, then that.
mm.
Whatever, might have been a bunch of those. If this, then if that, then that. So the syllogistic sort of journey could have been complex, but still, nonetheless, if I knew the relationship between an if and a then, and
Mm,
I could access the memorized data, then I felt like I was in a perfectly strong standing for clinical efficacy. The problem is that the first human being that walked in the door defied all of that.
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
this is where it gets weird, because the cleanliness, the sterility of a nearly mathematical composition of ifs and thens is not generally exhibited by people. They're far
yeah,
more messy. They're far more complicated. And uh, it was like a crisis, because I had firmly established an identity of being like super successful before I even saw people. Like, what does that even? So we see that a lot today. There's like this divide. The young practitioners in social media, they say the smart things. The students
yeah,
can rattle off, especially now with access to I went to school with no digital access either. I mean, we had just books. The internet was
yeah,
useless to the Chinese medicine student at the time. Um, so, it's very easy to sound smart in that way. And I'm really interested in like that transition from um, text to practitioner, and what mastery means in the interstices of those two places. Um,
yeah,
and I think that we all come to that junction, hopefully young in our careers, where we realize like, ooh, there's another thing that I have to develop, not just information, not just the data, but also some other thing that's like really hard to quantify, this interpersonal skill and whatever else, the other things. But that's interesting to me, like your daughter's journey in music. So music is just like this. You learn a scale,
yeah,
you learn the mathematical relationships that exist within chords, sevenths, fifths,
mm,
why they're called sevenths and fifths, whatever. And then you later learn the soul of music. You can learn
yes,
improvisation in music, and you can step beyond the scales. You can step in between the spaces, like Miles Davis or someone, just bending the rules, but so effectively. Um, and so I'm really interested in that, in the practice of Chinese medicine. Like, what does it mean for us taking for granted that you know what you're doing, obviously. Um, what does it mean to improvise? And what does it mean to be in the spirit of things rather than, playing the scales? Um, I'm interested in all of that.
So fascinating. As a practical thing for me, and again, I like analogies, so I'm going to step away from Chinese medicine just for a second. Before my daughter was born, I read every last parenting book I could. I would told my wife, I'm going to be the greatest parent that there ever was. I have all of the knowledge of all of the ancestral parents inside me at this point in time. And many, 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 many times since then, I have failed spectacularly. And yet in my failures, in my learning came growth, and I think that's where it's so important. Like you said, there's so much like that we can learn in the books, but then you have a patient in front of you. I for many years worked as a children's teacher. And again, same type of thing. I had all this knowledge that I learned in school. And then I went into my first classroom and the kids were very honest with me. This activity, this lesson sucks, teacher. This is not good. You are not succeeding right now. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, the brutal honesty of a 6-year-old. Like it's tough, and then you start to improvise. I remember once before I stopped teaching, my boss asked me, what is your classroom management style? I said, it's a tiny bit of a mix between improv, chaos, and a little bit of like pack hierarchy that you would see in a dog. I bark really loud when the kid does something wrong, but then I make everyone laugh afterwards, like stand-up comedy. And he's like, I don't know how to categorize that on your, evaluation form, but your students love you and everyone comes back and your class is really well, so he's like, I'll just say teacher's preference. I was like, okay, cool. And it's like, well, how did you come to that? Just lots of time in the classroom, lots and lots and lots of time in the classroom. And it became that the stone became polished and suddenly there was another way, And so I think that um, the hardest space for me, and I think the space that's most dangerous is the space before, like now, my daughter loves piano. But if we had have stopped 1 month before her mother came down, we never would have found that space
Yeah.
where you you're suddenly playing Bach, and it's like, what was it? The night before. I know in literature they call it the dark night of the soul. This moment before that breakthrough, and I know from classmates at Yost, and I know from seeing other practitioners, there are many people that are in that space of wanting to like, am I even doing this? Am I even learning this?
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I'm glad that your sort of like intended audience here is the students, especially at Yosan, which is an institution that I really respect. Um, because I think like these conversations can be helpful. Like we all get to school. I don't know, it's interesting. I don't know what the demographic is for incoming students anymore.
Yeah.
I used to have my finger on that pulse much better. Um, but when I went to school, it happened to be at that time a lot of uh, martial artists and Buddhists and things like that. People were definitely coming from like a sinophilic position where they really loved Chinese stuff. Um,
Mhm.
and I know that in my cohort of people, it was definitely there was a deep hunger for something special, spiritual,
Yeah.
esoteric in a way. I don't know if that's the demeanor these days. There seems to be a real deep hunger for, which importantly so, like clinical efficacy, respect from peers, things like that. I mean, there's definitely a more professional field of acupuncture now than there used to be. I really do think. Um, but I assume that there's still a yearning for that esoteric inner beauty that we're told exists within Chinese medicine. Unfortunately, though, that stuff is very hard to to teach, to assess, to put in books, things like that,
Yeah.
Um, and so each individual has to come to their own path in that stuff, and there's a lot of availability out there for what that means for people. And you know, for me, that that path was Taoism. I got into Chinese medicine because of Taoist studies. I actually went to Chinese medicine completely as an attempt to sort of literally to sort of be in proximity to Taoism. I was talking to a really well-known professor at the time of my graduation from undergrad, and I was like, I just want to do Taoism, and I'm not really sure I want to go do that in an academic setting. And he was like, "Oh, you just do Chinese medicine. Taoism is encrypted in Chinese medicine." Um, I disagree with that now. I disagreed with that early on as it occurred to me that it wasn't. But I did understand that cosmologies and worldview and natural scientific views that were consistent with Taoism were also consistent with Chinese medicine. But that was actually the weld. It wasn't the actual materials that were identical. But Taoism definitely allowed me a shift in my view around Chinese medicine to escape, not to not to not to decommission, but to sort of just put on hold all of the memorized stuff.
Mm.
And so I went back into various texts that I had perused as a hobby. I would go to the library all the time and look at the Chinese books. And one of my great hobbies was looking at the Bunsao Gongmu. That back then it was only in Chinese. It's now Unshold's crew has translated it. I have no access to that text. I can't afford it, but I assume it's good. But I rely on the Chinese version anyway, so I have that and I can read that. Luckily, but I would go into that, and in the Chinese herbal lore that is collected in that compendium in particular has a lot of weird stuff that really kind of just inspired me to understand new and completely different uh, sorry, someone just walked through my house. New and
No problem.
completely different aspects of Chinese medicine and its mechanisms, because some of those herbs, as they're described in lore in that text, because it's a text of collected lore, um, really exhibit something that's far outside of the typical syllogistic methodologies of what I call academic Chinese medicine. Um, and so lately I've been really obsessed with, it's actually a hard framework to describe because I don't really know, there's no native Chinese term for this stuff that I'm talking about. But I would venture to, with a lot of caveats, I would venture to call it magical medicine.
I like that.
Yeah, because it exists in a framework that's not rooted in the version of herbology that we get. That is, we get this sort of end result. So when we open up Bensky, which the text of which I love, so this is not a critique of Bensky at all. It's not a critique of anything. It's just a sort of observation. And we look at an herb with its functions, indications, and the variety of other little tidbits of information about it. What we're getting is the end result of generations of observation and then a stylized motif around its effects and utility. So, the whole language of herbal medicine is a stylized motif. It's standardized terminologies that anyone within the domain of herbal medicine can recognize those terms. Up bear, down bear, whatever, all of the various terminologies. And so you can actually learn herbal medicine Chinese language as a side project without even ever learning Chinese language. You can sort of translate herbal texts with some facility, with like not much, not an extensive amount of work, because it is so parceled out linguistically. So the thing about these other substances, I refer to them typically as obsolete substances because they're lost to the tradition after that text generally. They enter only into the folk tradition or religious circles generally, because they're so weird. And they don't have
Mm.
a basis for being understood in the general categories of what becomes a modern scientific medicine and Chinese medicine. Do you want some examples? I think that's cool to do.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, um, like for instance, if someone is mute, they lose their voice for whatever reason. And this is the thing that's funny is that immediately, if I say loss of voice, the very well-trained Chinese medicine practitioner is going to be like, loss of voice from what? Heat, cold, dry, wind, what pattern is it going to be? Because they can't even continue beyond that point without that linguistic framework, which is to say like a pattern diagnosis or whatever. So the thing is that the text is mute, no pun intended, on that issue. It just says loss of voice. So immediately it's interesting. It's disarming actually to the herbalist, the trained herbalist, because of that lack of specificity, we're kind of unmoored by that. We're challenged by that. We're afraid of that. Just loss of voice? We don't care
Mm.
how and why? And it doesn't. This is what's interesting about it, is that the medicinal that treats it, it too is so strange that it kind of defies the entirety of the encapsulation into the syllogistic realm of like ifs and thens. So to treat loss of voice, you go to you it's apparent that like, oh, everyone's got a rooster around somewhere. So you find the fence post, the slat that the rooster commonly roosts on, and I've seen this on
Yeah, no,
around
no.
farms. They go to the same spot and they cock-a-doodle-doo from the same spot. It's like they have their favorite zone, like the highest part of the fence. They go to something
Yep.
high, they perch up on there, and they do their call. That post is the medicine for treating loss of voice, because every morning the rooster on that post shouts to the world to wake it up. So the power of the voice is actually, it's in the bird, but there's also something
Mm.
essential about the bird being on that particular post is when it makes that sound. So there's something in here in that fence post that has the quality of vocalization. And so we get a few splinters of that, we boil it into tea and take that for the loss of voice. So this is what's interesting to me. Is it that the rooster so this leaves us in a quandary, though, herbally, that can be solved by other examples in the text. So is it the rooster's voice that imbues the wood with the quality of vocalization, or is it the wood that imbues the rooster with the urge to yell out?
Ooh.
See, this is the thing.
Ooh.
So why are we using the wood? If we're using the wood, we would assume that it causes the rooster to crow. But interestingly, there's this intermediary quality in this forgotten version of medicine where things can be changed by their interactions with consciousness, which is to
Mm.
say, a being, a rooster or a human or whatever, by some version of industry, by doing something, can actually change objects into medicine. This is what's
Wow.
fascinating. So there are other ones, like to induce labor in a stalled childbirth. You take, and there's various versions of this, so it's either the string, the arrow itself, the shaft of the arrow, whatever. You take a crossbow bolt, you burn it into ash, and the woman drinks the crossbow bolt that has been shot from a crossbow, by the way. It has to have been fired. and then that will induce the labor. So we think about the baby being fired from the womb, pushed out of the womb, like the string in a bow forces that arrow forth. So that arrow is imbued with the quality of this extraordinary, sleek, straight, like this is the thing about arrows. They fly straight, they fly true and fast, and that's the kind of qualities you want in a childbirth. True, fast, unencumbered, like a flight right out. So this, you take the quality of this, it has to be expended though. It has to have been a bolt that was shot, because that cocking the string, releasing the trigger, firing that arrow, this is what imbues this object and its substance with this quality of movement, of sleek movement. And so when you burn that into ash, you essentialize that arrow. Its qualities are still inherent in the ash, because the ash is what's reduced after all the other stuff is burned off. The essence of the arrow is in the ash, and that's a drinkable substance. That's the medicinal for promoting labor. So we see that with the case of the rooster and the fence post, that it's the rooster's crow that imbues the fence post with its voice. And so we eat that wood that's imbued with that quality, and we gain our voice. That bolt has been imbued with the quality of speed and flight and movement. We drink the ashes of that bolt. It allows the movement in the body to be, to be smooth and forceful. It's things like that. So now that's really distinct from taste, temperature, channels entered.
Yeah.
We don't care what taste, temperature, and channel that enters. It doesn't matter, because it's deeper in the substrate of existence in a way, interestingly, that it is more of just a quality, and that quality can be shared between objects, and our body, can absorb that quality and affect that quality that it's imbued with through contact with, consumption of, because there's a variety of these things. It's not always drinking or eating it. It could be wearing it as well. Contact with, consumption of, or other things, because it's a variety of things, of these substances, that the quality is absorbed by us, which I think is totally fascinating. And it really, so this was like 1997, opening that book, reading that, and then being in class, like, memorize this by next week. These were very different universes of perspective that I was working with, and they seemed to be two very distinct universes. And I needed, from that very initial era of study, I really wanted those things to be stitched together. They never were during school. They never were in the confines of my practice either, but they definitely became stitched together with my study of what is problematically referred to, but I'll refer to it this way because it's easier for people to understand, which is Daoist medicine. Daoist medicine really brought it all together for me, because it exists straddling those two realms. The quality of the imbued magical aspects of exchange, and the rote quasi-scientific practice of academic Chinese medicine.
I'm reminded of when I was younger, I read some of Plato. Plato had the realm of absolutes, and so, like, in Platonic thought, if you are looking at a chair, in some realm there exists the absolute chair, of which all chairs are simply an attempt to replicate that absolute chair. And in that realm of these absolutes is where the core essence of everything that we interact with comes from. And you see that in, what living in Asia, it's just part of the culture at times. There is this, when there is something that goes not right, my wife is like, there is something off. We have to look at the feng shui. We have to look at other things that are going on. And we just had an event in my own family 2 days. We just started my wife opened up, her father actually opened up a new company. And my wife's name is V, and she opened up a company called Velocity Media. And she actually is not the owner. She has her father as the owner just because it's easier for him. And, he has some connections and friends, but velocity, energy, movement. 2 days ago, he had a motorbike accident. He was flying along at high speeds, high velocity. And so my wife immediately says, we need to change that name or at least add a byline. So we redid our logo, Velocity Harmony in Movement. And like right away, changed it up. And she was like, I don't know why I didn't think about that. We have this name of a company. And she had the name of this company, Velocity, and we changed it to Harmony and Movement, and it's great. It works great because my wife is also a singer. So having harmony and movement is great. But she suddenly immediately is like, I can't believe I didn't think about that. That name, had this power to it. And yet, throughout, I've seen so many things like this. There was an anthropologist. I can never remember the name, and I have to look this up on ChatGPT or something. But he studied and trained with the Dene people. Would be what everyone else would call the what are the Dene? They call themselves the Dene, the a Native American group. And I again will look this up and put the name up on the screen when I get there. But the Navajo, we would call the Navajo, they call themselves the Dene. And this anthropologist lived and worked and studied with the Dene, and he was fascinated by so many things. But one thing was this deeper knowing. And that was one of the ways that he was able to describe it. And he remember he remembered an event, and he described this in this book. And again, I will find the name and I will put it up on screen and I will email it to you. But he talked about this. He was going and working as a social worker with the Dene people, and there was this one old man who he had gotten a relationship with, and the man looked at him, and man was in good health. Everything was normal, and he was just getting old. But then one day he said, Doc, I just wanted to thank you for all this time that you've come out and spent with me. I really enjoyed this, but I'm going to be leaving next week. And I need you to know that because I would like to say my goodbyes. And the doctor's like, you have nothing wrong with you. What do you mean you're going to be leaving next week? And he says, okay, it's okay, Doc. Don't worry about it. But I really have enjoyed our time. So thank you for that. And then, the doctor's like, okay, whatever, you don't have, I'm a doctor. You have nothing wrong with you. You are not going to be dying next week. And the next week, the doc came back and the man had passed. And he's like, and in the book, he goes and he says, I try to wrap my mind around this a million different ways. And nothing in my training understands this. Besides that, there is something that is beyond my training that interacts with this world. And he says there were so many different examples of that he interacted with. And he says there is something deeper but it's interesting because there's this magic that interacts with our world, and
Yeah.
for lack of a better word, a magic that we are interacting with. So what you're describing is so awesome. Let me, and you can respond to what I said, but how did you get into this Taoist lineage? How can other people start learning about this as well?
Um, how I got into it, eh, I mean, it's just like so many people I know. It's a mix of like growing up in the 70s,
Yeah,
which means Bruce Lee and all of
yeah,
the Shaw Brothers films. I mean, so there was like that weird fantastical like obsession. Definitely was I would say the core, the original core. But in my teenage years, it was the typical teen angst and a yearning for um, a worldview that was distinct from the one that I felt dissatisfied by. So Taoism was introduced to me as a teenager because I had hippie parents. I know you had Daniel Schreier on here. He had hippie parents too. And I think we both came to it the same way, which I would call honestly. But the I went to China and I was supposed to go in 1989. Obviously, I couldn't. That was the Tiananmen year. So I went in 90 instead. And so this is where it really happened for me, though. I saw a temple festival, and I was with a translator, and I said, "What's going on there?" Because it was like an electromagnet. Like it was all I want. At that moment, I was like, "This is all I want. Whatever's going on in there, that's what I want." And they were like, "Oh," and it was so flippant, the response from the translator. And I was like, "Oh boy." I realized something about China at that moment. I was like, if I really want to look, if I really want to study this place, these people, their culture, I have to learn this language. Without that, there's no hope.
Yeah.
So that's what drove me to study Chinese language when I went to college. The good news for me was that while I was there, it just so happened, because this is definitely not the case anywhere, really, other than a few schools. I had a scholar of Taoism that was teaching there as well as the Chinese language program. And this was Lisa Raffles. She's my mentor of all mentors. I owe her so much. I haven't talked to her in years, but studying with her and studying Chinese language really was what brought me to Taoism intellectually and academically. So there's a problem there, is that I was on the outside looking in at it. And that was almost more disappointing than feeling like I didn't know where to find it. Because now I knew, but I had no access. It was like,
Yeah.
we're there talking about these things, but we're doing it all through the aperture of text and books and scholarship and academia and the perspectives of people who are studying very small pieces very deeply. And I was like, this isn't the same thing as studying the spiritual tradition as a member of that tradition. So that's when I had that conversation with that one professor. He was at the University of Pennsylvania at the time. And that's what led me to Chinese medicine school, which also, of course, as an aspiring student of Taoism, Chinese medicine school was yet another exceedingly deep disappointment, just in terms of Taoism, not in terms of Chinese medicine. And then I realized, like, okay, I'm in New York. There are temples everywhere. It's a living community. And I really dug into the diaspora community. I started communicating with the scholars of Taoism all over the place, writing emails and communicating and being a member of the various pre-social media chat rooms and boards that were established for people who were interested in this to communicate with each other. And through that developed a means and a network to get back to China, to study there, to meet my teacher, and most importantly, to meet Jack Schaefer, my partner, who you've also interviewed, at Parting Clouds, our Taoist temple. And the synergy of Jack and I meeting is truly, talk about magic. That was one of the most profound things that's ever happened in my life, was my meeting Jack, and our immediate synchronous, like, desire to make this easier for people, because it was really not fun for us to get to where we were there on that mountain at that temple. It was the most ridiculous path that we had to take. And we wanted to make it possible for people to have access to the tradition in these ways and to those places in a direct and uncomplicated, non-abusive way. Because it's easy to get abused out there as well on this journey. So that's how it happened. and Jack and I have been teaching for 10 years together. Um, and our community is incredible. Um, Hundreds of Daoists, um, and real Johan and Johan, yeah, who you just interviewed recently as well. Like, we have these amazing people who have come with their own extraordinary experience, and the synergy within the community is just really exceptional. Um, so we you should also interview Lindsay Way. But anyway, we have a really strong community, and Rob Hoffman, the big shot at your school, Yosan, is one of our priests as well. I mean, we have this incredible. I could go on. And actually, every single person is an extraordinary person. I shouldn't even be naming names, but this is the joy of this community, is that we are. We have so many people with access to Chinese language, and we do all of our own translations and everything, and so we're really enjoying an authentic Taoist community here in the States now, and it's been really rewarding to be associated with all of these people. So that's been my journey, from the imaginary realm of New York City's public, or maybe it was Channel 11. Yeah, it was Channel 11, WPIX, the uh, the Sunday matinee kung fu movies, and just watching that, just being enthralled with. Not, it's funny, it wasn't the martial arts that enthralled me. It was like the spiritual dimension, the ability for these people to do these supernatural things, and the references, and to inner calm and peace, and how that really drives its potentials and powers. I don't know, all of those great things. And so started out with all of that and ended up here, and that's the journey so far. I mean, it's not over. So that's
Yeah.
we'll see where it goes, but it's been incredible, and I'm really uh the most I'm most grateful for the community of people that I get to be associated with, honestly. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
If you could, one last question, if you could go back in time and give a younger version of yourself some advice on this journey, what would it be?
Don't be angry.
Mm.
It's so consuming, and it's so damaging, and a lot of the dead ends that I've experienced in my life were from me in some way being angry and clouding my own vision. And anger, I think, has a lot of subcategories as well. So I mean that term generally, but like, don't be angry when you're at school and you feel dissatisfied. There,
Mm.
there is a there is a there is a path that we've all designed. Good people have put this pathway down for hundreds of years. It might not feel right to you right now, but trust me, there's a method to it all. Like, that's what I would say, is the frustrations that we can feel as students, as participants in things at the beginner stage. We can get frustrated, we can get angry, we can want to quit. We could be in that place, that darkness that you were talking about, where it's like, oh, never mind, I don't want this anyway, when you really do. But you're just angry at
Yeah.
that moment. And you're going to put something down that you really should keep carrying, that you should really treasure and foster. And when you get angry, you start throwing things, and you start, you know, um, letting it all go, thinking everything's going to be better, and then only to regret it later. So I would just say, like, yeah, don't get angry.